I'm Ben Gonzalez, and this is TDI. Well, today we're looking at some of the most common questions we see online about home insurance. And joining us today is Misty Highnote from TDI's Public Affairs Office to help us answer some of those questions. Hi, Misty.
Hi, Ben.
So first on our list, this is one we saw a lot of in different kind of variations, but is homeowners insurance required in Texas?
Right. There's no state law that says you have to have homeowners insurance, but if you have a loan on your house, there's a good chance that your lender is going to require it. They want to protect their loan, and they do that by you having insurance. But it's not required by law, but it's still a good idea because you want to be able to protect your assets if something were to happen to your house.
Right. If you're still making house payments, chances are you're going to need insurance too. This one's kind of related to that. Some people have been saying, I just can't afford it. If I don't have a mortgage right now, maybe I have an older house, can I just go without homeowners insurance?
Right, and that's a big concern. But if the cost is a factor, think about the cost that it would think about how much it would cost to replace your house. So if you had a fire, a total destruction of your house, you'd have to rebuild that house with some kind of money. Insurance would pay for that. If you didn't have insurance, that would come out of your pocket. Even if there's damage to your house, that's going to be a pretty big cost to your house. So just think about the cost, what it would cost to replace or repair your house. And then you also have to think about the cost of the stuff inside your house. So your furniture, your clothes, your electronics, all that stuff that insurance pays for. If you don't have it, that's money coming out of your pocket.
Right. And when I'm out shopping for home insurance, how much do I need to get?
Right. And that really depends on your house, the coverages you want. But you want to make sure that you have enough to replace your house, to repair your house. Like I said, worst case scenario is a fire is going to burn your house to the ground. So you want to make sure you have enough to replace your entire house if something like that were to happen. You can talk to your agent, your company about how much it would cost to replace your house. And what we're thinking about these days is also the lumber prices. Everyone has heard about those going through the roof. So maybe talk to your agent or your company maybe once a year and say, do I have enough to replace my house? Right now with the lumber prices, there's a good chance that it's going to cost more to replace or repair your house than it would in previous years. And that could always change. So you want to check on that, make sure you have enough. You also want to make sure you have enough, again, back to your furniture and your clothes. Say you bought a policy 10 years ago and you haven't really touched it since then. There's a good chance you've bought more furniture, maybe you've upgraded, you've bought more clothes, you might have started a collection. So you just want to think about that too. There's a good chance you might need to increase your coverage on your personal property too, the stuff you own.
Right. And I guess a lot of policies do have kind of those automatic increases over time, but nobody knows your stuff like you do.
Right.
What does home insurance cover besides like the structure itself?
Right. So your policy will say what it covers, and it's always great to read that or ask your company to know exactly. But generally, it'll cover fire, lightning, theft. If a car or plane were to hit your house, explosion. I know some pretty big things. They happen, but right. And then also things like sudden water leak. So if you have a broken washer hose, if your toilet overflows, things like that. If you live along the Gulf Coast, your wind and hail is going to be separate. So you want to talk to your agent about that. And there's a good chance that your homeowners isn't going to cover floods. So ask your agent about that too. There's a good chance you might need a different policy. But it doesn't cover things like termites, wear and tear, earthquakes, things like that. So there's a lot it doesn't cover as well.
So some of those outside risks may require different kinds of policies.
Right.
You mentioned flood there. We saw some of that during the freeze earlier. If a pipe bursts, that's different than rising water from a storm, correct?
Right. Yeah. A flood policy, you kind of think about the things outside your house. So the other elements that are coming in from a huge flood that affects multiple acres, that's kind of considered a flood with a separate flood policy.
Okay, perfect. So another question we see a lot online is, hey, my neighbor is paying this. How come I'm paying much more? So what factors go into what I'll pay for my home insurance?
Right, right. Every house is different. They look at what your house is made of. So do you have brick? Do you have siding? They look at where your house is. So maybe you're closer to a fire hydrant, maybe you're closer to a fire station. If you're a half mile from a fire station or 5 miles from a fire station, that makes a big difference in how long it's going to take the fire department to respond to your house, put out the fire, and that's the less damage that your insurance has to pay. So it all kind of correlates. You kind of wonder, why does it matter how far I live? But insurance companies are thinking about this. So write what your house is made of, the proximity, and also how safe your house is. Do you have fire alarms? Do you have burglar alarms? The landscaping, do you have trees that cover up windows that people can get in to steal things from your house? So there's a lot of things that companies look at when deciding how much to charge.
And that's another good reason to make sure you keep maintaining that property, so that if they do come to look at it, it'll look as safe as it can.
Yes.
And another thing people sometimes don't understand is that maybe you just moved into the house, or somebody else lived there before you. That house has a history. Tell us about the Clue report and what that shows.
Right. So companies are going to look at your past claims history when deciding how much to charge you. And they find out what claims have been filed on your house by something called a Clue report, CLUE. And they look at that for the past 7 years. No matter who owned your house, they can see what claims were filed on your house. So if you have a history of a lot of really big claims, they might charge you more, thinking that that's possible in the future. And if you want to see the Clue report, you can Google it, CLUE, and you can get a Clue report every year to see what kind of claims have been filed if you're a new owner and you want to know.
Okay, perfect. Well, this is the last one for today. How do I go about shopping for home insurance? It seems like I need it, so how do I shop for it?
Right. The first place you can turn to is our website called Help Insure, HELP. And we have sample rates, sample policies. So you can get an idea of what companies offer and what companies you might want to call for a more exact estimate. Right. Yeah. A better quote. They'll just give you an estimate on Help Insure, but it's a good starter place. And then once you decide what company you want to go with, be sure to talk about coverage. We talked about that a lot before, making sure you have enough to rebuild your house and replace your stuff. So talk to them about coverage. And then also ask about discounts, because they might offer a discount if you have an auto and a home policy with the same company. Say you have a fire alarm, some of the stuff we talked about earlier. If you have some of that stuff, they might offer a discount. Then you also want to talk about your deductible. That's another big factor in how much your policy is going to cost. Usually, if you have a higher deductible, you'll have a lower premium. But also remember, if you have that higher deductible, that's the money you have to pay before your insurance company will pay. So if you have a $5,000 deductible, remember, you're going to have to pay that out of your own pocket before the company starts to pay. So talk about deductibles with your company. And then the last thing we tell people is call us, call TDI, and check on a company. Ask us if they're licensed. Ask us about their financial information. We'll tell you what kind of standing they're in to make sure they're a good company.
All right. Thanks, Misty. That's a lot of good information. So you can find some of this on our website at tdi.texas.gov. We've got information about homeowners and all kinds of insurance there. You'll find short articles, videos, and more tips there. You can also call our helpline if you have a specific question. That's 800-252-3439. You can ask questions there. So for Misty Highnote, I'm Ben Gonzalez. This is TDI.